So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay, and as I said, this is the last in a series of 3 battle replays that were pointed out to me by Lord of Belagos, which is kind of the introduction really to the Naugrim for Silmarillion, the Dwarven faction that is in the game. And this is a map that we have seen in the past before. This is the variant of Gondolin that is in the current version of the game. It's worth saying actually that I'm going to be recording the intro for this battle and the actual battle itself later on, after I've been on a trip away for work. And as a result of the replays I'm doing being on different versions of the game, technically speaking, this is a replay in its current form, which is actually in error. However, I'm only filming the intro for it on this before I update the whole version of the game later on, so that I can actually do the replay properly. But the differences are more going to be statistical in nature rather than any actual differences in terms of things that we can see. So for an intro's purposes this will do just fine, but do bear that in mind. The actual battle replay I'm going to be recording a couple of weeks later, past the point that I actually got this one. And I'm going to be recording all the intros in sequence and doing the battles a little bit later. And this is the only time I felt the need to mention that, because the other two are on the previous version of the game, the one that I'm technically on at the moment, whereas this one is on one with a little bit of an update for the dwarves, which I just assume are minor statistical tweaks. But as I said, for the intro that's not all that important, and we will be going through simply the army compositions and the players involved. As for the theme of this battle, there is kind of a theme I suppose, and as is often the way, the dwarves seem to have fallen foul of corruption, because Angband here, played by Captain Gervais, are sitting in the centre of Gondolin as it has fallen to the enemy, and 2 Naugrim armies are flanking them. So this is a very heavy duty defence this. Angband themselves are very much focused around their heavy infantry and heavy armour, and that is of course what the Naugrim also traffic in, and we're going to be seeing 4 elven factions attempt to reconquer lands that rightfully belong to them. Gondolin is a rather large settlement, so some multifaceted attacks from different elven factions will certainly come into play here. And we shall start off with Lord of Belagos himself, who is playing as the elves of Ossiriand, maybe a little bit more lightweight among the elven ranks, but they certainly have got plenty of power when it comes to their ability to deal damage with their archers. They have a few units of infantry as well, which should be pretty good against the Naugrim and Angband, but we'll get onto them as we see them. Stuff like the Scouts of Gallion here. Many of the Ossiriand units can hide, but when you're attacking in a settlement that's less of a good thing. When you're defending, it means that you can prevent your units from getting hit by attacking archers, but if you're attacking you can't really afford to stand still. You need to move your units and ultimately reveal them. Even still, the Scouts of Gallion are still a very damaging unit of entry-level archers, relatively speaking. Hunters of Rathloriel are a unit of javelins. Javelins come in 2 flavours in Silmarillion, of course, armour-piercing and non-armour-piercing. The non-armour-piercing variants do tend to have a lot more ammunition and range, however, so that is a bit of a trade-off. Hunters of Rathloriel here also double as sort of basic spears in melee when they have run their ammunition supply dry. More hunters here. This is the unit that I was talking about. There are a couple of units of Mithrim and Tol Galen. This is going to be by far the most effective unit of regular infantry that Ossiriand have to deploy against Dwarven and Orcish units because of that armour-piercing mace that they wield. And also statistically they're just the strongest unit of Ossiriand infantry units, dedicated infantry units at any rate. Because you have to look at the Ents really as more of a monstrous infantry unit, in that they have more of the effect that the Balrogs have for Angband. And if they're deployed at the right time, they could be very effective, but they do need to be careful, because both Angband and the Naugrim are going to have the ability to burn down monstrous units like this pretty quickly if they engage against the wrong targets, but timing can be everything with a unit such as this. Earthen End Tower, again, nice unit of archers. This certainly heavier in nature than a lot of what Ossiriand have elsewhere, and also the armour-piercing 2-handed axe that they wield in melee is also going to be useful for engaging in close quarters against the armies that are arrayed against them on this occasion. We also have some Spear Host of Gallion here, so some phalanx units. I mean, they don't have anything other than 2-handed spears, Ossiriand, but this is still the sort of unit that can be very useful if they engage against the right targets. Unfortunately for them, the Naugrim in particular, but also Angband, I should say, also have phalanx units, so it's not something they can use to bully the opposition late on, regardless of what else happens, but it's still something nice to have in your back pocket as an anchor. We have Lancers of Aderant, which, in a siege battle like this, Lancers that are focused on doing damage off a charge that are relatively lightweight like these guys are. Obviously armour is not Ossiriand's strong point, and they aren't even shielded. Very damaging off the charge. Whether they can utilise that or not will determine if this was a worthwhile pick, because they can't really even be used defensively against a sally out from defending cavalry. Not that that was very likely given the dwarven dominant nature of the defence, so maybe having this mobility, there is method in the madness. Scouts of Galleon, more spear host here, more scouts, and over here we have more hunters, so a rather simplistic army in terms of they've got many units that are repeated, with a few units individually like the Lancers, and over here the Ondo Hyando and San Athrad, which completely unsurprising to see them. The armour-piercing archer is pretty much a given, again, given that the Naugrim and Angband are your opponents. I don't think there's anything else. A little bit surprising not to see... Oh yeah, they do. I was going to say, the Rangers, effectively, the body-piercing projectiles of the Randirim. If you can position them correctly, more difficult to do as the attackers, but still, the damage ceiling on a unit like this is too good to really ignore. So again, specialty projectiles, plenty of regular archers as well. Another army of relative lightweights in the Avari, another faction that's focused a little bit more around guerrilla warfare perhaps and hit and run, which is not ideal in a siege battle, especially when they're having to team up with Ossiriand on the same side. I mean, the Thorncasters here are pretty resilient actually for a unit of throwing projectile infantry. And they're reasonably solid in melee as far as their survivability goes. They don't necessarily do a lot of damage, which is a bit of a problem given the defensive facilities that the defenders have. But yeah, Thorncasters should be pretty good at dealing damage from afar, sort of short to mid-range, which is the Avari's whole thing really, throwing projectiles. The Bow Wards are the most entry-level unit of infantry that the Avari can bring. Very basic spears, not likely to do a whole lot of damage, but if you want to fill out your army with some numbers, you don't necessarily have a huge amount of choice as the Avari, so there they are. We can't really see a whole lot else from the Avari. Most of their army does appear to be hidden, so they've got some Rangers of the Hidden Path, more Javelins, they've got some Gloom Hunters of the Trackless Dark, which are a shock infantry unit, but other than that I'm sure we shall see more of their army appear later on. There's probably some at least down here ready to go through the middle. Yeah, some more Bow Wards, and is this the General's unit? No, but the Shades of the Guarded Path are kind of similar in many ways to the Mithrim, only they are a base damage rather than armour-piercing unit. That's still useful. I mean, they're still going to be significantly better than a lot of the other units that the Avari have brought that we can see in melee anyway. Basic spears. Host of the Withered Ash. Very much a similar sort of thing to the Spear Host of Galleon, only they are higher tier, so same sort of thing. And here we are, the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth is here, and he's going to be throwing his projectiles into the settlement. The Elves of the Phalas, played by Tundra's Fox. He's got some Spearmen of Brithombar, which again, basic javelins, we've already seen very much a similar sort of thing in the Hunters of Rathloriel. The Falathrim do have the ability to bring some heavier units, which is a good thing for the attackers. A catapult here as well is also going to keep the attackers on their toes, can't afford to set up in a position that's too disadvantageous. Scouts of Aglarest are the kind of unit which can cover your advance quite nicely because they're sword cavalry. So again, nice fast movers as well, so you can still be catch the enemy off balance with them. The Iran Kielim, one of the first examples of a heavily armoured Elven unit that we have seen. Fantastic Noldor infantry this. We shall see how well they can trade blows with fellow heavily armoured units on the defence. Plenty more Spearmen and Brithombar here. Maybe it's not too surprising to see the Elves go for some of their lighter and more medium units given that the defenders are what they are, so you don't want to just headbutt the Dwarves and Angband necessarily as many of the Elven factions. There are a few that can do it, but maybe the Falathrim here more dependent on their combined arms, not the ones to try it with. Marines of Aglarest for more javelins, more Marines of Brithombar back here, so plenty of javelins here for the attackers. Seafarers of Brithombar, this is a unit of, I'd call them light infantry, but they do carry a mace. So they are going to be able to add some armour piercing, some much needed armour piercing to these front lines. We have the heaviest, I should say, of all of the Falathrim infantry units, the Orion Ephedune. Very tanky unit of spears, multiple HP, and also the Nobles of Balar. We've seen plenty of two-handed spears from the other two factions we've seen already, but this is a more heavy-duty version. Unsurprisingly, the Falathrim filling that role so far among the elves. And last but by no means least, we have Mithrim, so pretty lightweight in terms of all of the factions that are attacking, to be honest. We're seeing nothing of Feanor or Finarfin or Fingolfin, factions which perhaps would have given more heft to this attack, but Mithrim have got plenty of very vicious long-range units, much like Ossiriand over on the other side. Only Mithrim combine this with maybe being a little bit more capable in terms of traditional battles, with Sentries of Mithrim here, another catapult. We've got some Outlaws of Hithlum, so again a bit of a focus on javelins. The Hewing Guildsmen of Androth are interspersed throughout as well, going to be very important and useful against the heavily armoured defenders. We have some tunnel runners of Mithrim damaging, but are they survivable enough? We shall see. Sentries of Mithrim and some hunters back here once again. Mithrim are another faction which do have the ability to hide several of their units, and given the trees that are over here in this farmland, I would imagine that that's going to be the case once again. Now then, the first of the defenders, we have Farkin playing as one of the two Naugrim armies. We see some Iron Guardsmen of Belagos, so given that they are outnumbered by an army, it's not too surprising to see a lot more of these more elite units. And of course the defenders are going to be hoping that the attackers break upon their very solid front lines and bounce off. Iron Guardsmen of Belagos, as I said. Iron Halberdiers, I mean, maybe this is a little bit more of a questionable decision to bring the Halberdiers. I mean, the pikes are probably more expensive, to be fair, but the Iron Halberdiers, of course, the armour piercing is not going to be quite so useful. There are some Noldor units from the Falathrim that it's going to be useful against, but other than that, relatively few and far between the heavily armoured units on the defence. Still, it is a phalanx, and that is still something that Mithrim will struggle to reconcile with unless they try and shoot them down first. The Iron Arbalists of Balagost, which could be in the position of getting bullied by especially Mithrim skirmishers in a situation like this, even with their shields and heavy armour. But given the superior terrain they have, it's not really the sort of thing Mithrim can try and force out of position here, as long as the Naugrim position themselves correctly. We have got some Lifeward Hewers of Ered Luin, so again, very heavily, or high tier I should say, shock infantry. Armour piercing again though with the focus. Here are the Lifeward Pikemen. Unsurprising to see them because they can be really fantastic if they find the right position to dig into on a map like this. Dragon Slayers, as we've already said, a really devastating unit potentially of line infantry. This should be the sort of thing which should actually be very effective against a lot of the units that they're going to be faced with. Some Miners of Nogrod, which is actually where the general's going to be hidden, so other units can be used more freely, and the mighty High Thanes of Ered Luin as well, as we've seen in the past, in the very last battle in fact, or the very last siege battle with the Naugrim. They can be a bit of a problem for attackers to have to try and deal with. Over on this side, the other Ered Luin army, or the Naugrim army I should say, commanded by Alexander 10Q. High Thanes are here. Got some more Lifeward Hewers, some more Arbalists. I'd imagine it's going to be much the same sort of thing with Halberdiers, with Pikemen, maybe a little bit more of a presence of these Axe Throwers, which maybe that's not too surprising. Axe Throwers can be really nasty if they get clean shots, and that's easier to do as the defenders in a settlement like this, so maybe it's more surprising to not see them in the other army. Basic though they may be, their range threat is still such that they represent a real threat. And he has brought the chariots as well, the Iron Legion Engineers. Now chariots, you know, again, they can be really very effective. More often they are not as effective, however. It really does come down to timing. There are enemy fast movers as well, so we shall have to wait and see. But other than that, the heart of the armies is going to be very much the same here. And Captain Gervais's Angband force is going to be the last one that we look at here. Crossbows are going to be the order of the day on the defence, because both factions that have access to them are joining forces for this one. Albeit the Ironshod Arbalists are not quite as impressive as their counterparts from the Naugrim, but as we said, stopping power of crossbows means that they're all going to be able to deal good damage. The Scourges of Gothmog, a good choice actually. High damage Angband units, maybe not quite as tanky as a lot of what Angband have to offer elsewise, but they should still be pretty good against a lot of the lighter units of elves, as actually should be the line infantry bodyguard that Angband have, the Bulldogs. Fantastic unit of high-end infantry that they have at their disposal. The rest of the Angband army is in one big blob. I think there's probably going to be more Arbalists just setting up their stakes over there. The Uroloki, which again, against lightly armoured forces, the Uroloki are very, very deadly potentially, and they have the similar sort of effect as chariots, only they tend to be more effective than chariots at doing their job of pulling through enemy lines. They can be a real nightmare, as I have learnt in the past. Thralls of Angband here, basic archers, but still could be useful to at least contest the archer game with the attackers, who are going to be pretty dominant in that field, but again, hopefully the terrain for the defenders will do most of the work for them in terms of equalising that for their crossbows, with more of the Arbalists here. Ironshod Ravagers with the armour upgrade again. Armour piercing, is it really worthwhile to bring this much armour piercing for the defenders, especially given the fact that they are going to be far more vulnerable, even with the armour upgrade, to enemy missiles? It's maybe a little bit of a red rag to a bull here from Captain Gervais. The elves will be hoping that they can take full advantage of this. I'm not so sure about this pick, but we shall see. I mean, the Halberdiers I can understand more because of their phalanx capabilities, and the fact that, you know, you don't really want to lose that. It's Angband's only option in this regard. And also some Iron Crown units back here, more Thralls, but primarily we've got a lot of Spear Guard. We also have some of the Tormentors of the Iron Crown, the armour piercing, and once again not going to be quite as useful perhaps. I mean, it will help equalise the fight against stuff like Aran Kia Lim, But for the most part, the main attraction for these guys is going to be the fact they've got really heavy armour and big shields. And also, finally, the Troll Guard of Gothmog, which they may not have the same theatre as the Balrogs, but they are actually maybe a safer pick. They're a little bit cheaper, and they aren't subject to anti-monster damage, only to things that are traditionally effective against infantry. There's also actually the Iron Drakes in there as well, which is effectively Greek fire throwers, if any of you have played Byzantium in Standard Med 2. But as I mentioned, for me it'll be the passage of 2 weeks, but for you it'll be the passage of about 10 seconds as I make a little bit of a cut here, and all of these armies amble their way into position, and the assault on Gondolin to try and reconquer it for the Elves begins. So I'll make a cut, and see you in a couple of weeks. So I guess we shall rejoin here as the catapult blows start to rain down upon the Angband position. There's still quite a long way actually before the two armies on the flanks get into full position, however. It does look as though we are going to start to see a bit of back and forth between the armies here in the central lane, as Angband's Troll Guard are going to move forward to presumably utterly destroy this unit of Spearmen of Brythombar, which I can see why you would want to open up with a bit of skirmishing, especially where the Iron Shod Ravagers are concerned, but this little detachment of Spearmen of Brythombar is not going to do very well under the attention of heavily armoured trolls such as this. And yeah, this probably isn't going to go too well for them. They're going to try and get a few volleys of their javelins off, but it's almost certainly not going to be all that worthwhile in the long run. Something else to also bring attention to is I wasn't going to rejoin just for this alone, but the Iron Legion Engineers, the chariots, the Dwarven chariots up on the walls, did have the range to be able to do this to the approaching Ossiriand force, with a little bit of support coming from the Avari as well. But you can see how much damage they were able to do, so while there aren't very many of them, and while their fire rate is going to be relatively low, if you hover in their view for too long, their projectiles are very damaging, and it actually completely diverted the route that Ossiriand and this little detachment of the Avari were having to take as well, so it's going to take them even longer to get to the Naugrim position over on this side of the battlefield as well. So that was one of my fears, perhaps, with the 4 Elven armies that have been taken being pretty much the lightest of the bunch. Maybe you wouldn't say that about the Falathrim, but the Elves are going to have to be very careful here, because simply charging into a well-prepared and dug-in position occupied by the two factions in the game which I think are most reliant on heavy armour and this sort of heavy-duty infantry approach. Yes, there's Feanor as well, but they've got a few other things, a few other strings to their bow as well, their cavalry focus being one of them. But this is exactly the sort of battle in which Angband should be able to make really good use of their various units, the Naugrim as well, with their ability to lay on a very solid front line. You can see there that it didn't really go too well for the Spearmen of Brythombar, and that is to the surprise of, or should be to the surprise of, absolutely nobody really, given the fact that they were sent forward largely on their own. They needed a little bit more support in order to ward off the trolls. I don't really know what the Falathrim can do in that situation. They've got a few units perhaps which are going to be good at burning through units in melee quickly, but most of their army from an infantry standpoint is going to be a little bit more defensive, not exactly ideal for taking on trolls. I think it would have to be another unit of javelins perhaps that they sent forward specifically to counteract them, some armour piercing ones perhaps. Because yeah, Nobles of Balar aren't going to do it. Even the Orion Ephradoom, their bodyguard tier unit, is a heavy spearman fairly exclusively. Mithrim over on this side, they've got the added obstacle of this little cliff here that they have to contend with, which isn't true on the other side of the field. The Naugrim already taking up a pretty nasty looking defensive position with the Iron Guardsmen and Iron Halberdiers waiting to receive the Mithrim army. They too are taking the long route around. Mithrim, of course, will have the advantage in terms of long-range skirmishing, but once we've already mentioned in the preamble to this battle that the terrain is such that that isn't going to be too much of a problem for the dwarves on this occasion. They're going to be able to maintain that range and be able to use their crossbows well, potentially. A couple of units of the Iron Arbalists here waiting for their moment. And now I'm starting to reposition a little bit, but I think I will make another little cut here because I don't think that the attack is going to fall as quickly as maybe you would expect. I think they are going to wait for the armies in the west to get in position before they actually renew the assault properly. There's always something that happens very quickly, isn't there, after I decide to try and make a cut. But yes, the Iron Legion Engineers are here once again, trying to make life a little bit more difficult for the Avari and primarily Ossiriand-led attack here in the east. Excuse me. Cavalry coming in here, the Lancers of Aderant trying to get a charge off. This is a bit of a problem, to be honest with you, with the with the chariots. Once they get bogged down like this, excuse me, they're going to fall away pretty quickly, and that would not surprise me on this occasion to see that be the case. So I'm not entirely sure if this was a wise move from Alexander 10Q. Chariots are pretty expensive as well, as much as we saw the devastation earlier on that they wrought upon the Ossiriand advance. I'm not entirely sure they've paid for themselves just yet. They are trying to penetrate into the lines as we speak, and they are doing some damage to this unit of Thorncasters from the Avari, but even still, they're going to fall away here, and that is going to be the end of the chariots. This does actually serve the purpose of delaying this assault yet further from Ossiriand / the Avari, which is something to consider, because it does look as though the Mithrim may well be looking to attack quickly. I mean, Ered Luin here could force the issue by charging downhill into the waiting ranks of these sword bearers, and they would be victorious as well. If the dwarves want to take a more aggressive approach, then this unit of line infantry would not be doing too much to stop them, I fear. There is the whistle of crossbow bolts as well that we can hear, but what are they actually going after? Outlaws of Hitler? Where is that unit of crossbows? I can hear the crossbows shooting, but I'm not entirely sure what they're going after. I mean, the hewing guildsman would be a good port of call for that. Tunnel runners moving forward. We saw them be pretty effective actually in the last game as a flanking unit. When the front lines on the side start to falter a little bit, the tunnel runners were able to prise into the dwarven front lines and do a pretty good job of that. In the last siege we saw the Naugrim exclusively try to defend on. Now with a little bit of support from the Orcs, we shall see if they fare any better. The Orcs, though, not having to deal with too much in the way of attentions after the disastrous attack from that one detachment of Spearmen of Brythombar. Thralls of Angband ready to do their thing. Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth trying to shoot into these iron-shod arbalists by the looks of things. I mean, the Thralls of Angband are most certainly not a particularly damaging archer, but they will perhaps force the issue a little bit as the Falathrim begin to try and start crossing the bridge. You can see here, this is where the light armour on the Brythombar class units is going to start to work against them a little bit, because even though it is a basic archer only they're having to deal with, they will take more in the way of losses than they otherwise would. This is a problem with all of the Elven attacking armies to a greater or lesser extent today. Just again, another unit of singular Spearmen of Brythombar. I'm not really sure about this. I mean, using their javelins to skirmish with the Thralls of Angband, perhaps. The Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth continuing to do its thing and continuing to do some good damage to the Ironshod Ravagers. You can see as well, actually, that he does appear to be bloodying up the Uroloki, which this is an especially devastating unit to lightly armoured troops, which means they are public enemy number one, really, for all of the Elven armies today, outside of the Noldor that the Falathrim themselves are bringing. But the Uroloki as well are going to be able to feast on the Spearmen of Brythombar. They may not be, I mean, taking this many javelins isn't going to be that great for their health, but they are still going to be able to destroy this unit without too many issues, I would have thought. They are a monstrous class unit though, so this spear bonus should be coming into effect, but that's not going to be enough to save these poor units here. As the Hydras continue to do their work, but yeah, the Trollguard of Gothmog will be even more effective at ridding themselves of this nuisance. Not really sure what Tundra's Fox is hoping to achieve here, to be honest with you. Trying to skirmish with the spears, or these kind of javelins, is something you can do in Silmarillion, but not when they're so isolated like that, and not when Angband have got fairly fast-moving trolls that can very easily counteract what you're trying to do. Meanwhile, two very distinct lanes of attack here. The Outlaws of Hithlum trying to use their throwing axes, which is certainly not the worst idea against the dug-in dwarven defence, but they're going to be engaged in melee and they're going to be killed off really very, very easily here, I would have imagined, by the kind of dwarven units they're having to try and take on. Meanwhile, hewing guildsmen are moving forward in support of some sword bearers and some tunnel runners. This side of things perhaps a little bit more of a problem for the dwarves, but even still, there's the iron arbalists. A few of them are shooting. Not the best of positioning this from Farkin though for his iron arbalists, because they don't really have the best of angles. They're all bunched up in a singular line. Not really sure about that one. The High Thanes are waiting to move in should their services be required. I think the addition of those halberdiers on the front line is going to be fairly key. What's going on back over here? Oh, I see. There is another route into the settlement. It takes a long time to get over here, though. The Lance or Scouts of Eglarest probing the situation, seeing if there is a potential route in. I mean, the Lifeward Hewers are not a spear or pike or halberd unit, but in sustained melee, heavy axemen are still very, very devastating to cavalry, so I don't really think the Scouts of Eglarest are going to have the ability to get through here. There's a couple of units of Avari on their way over here to just ensure that the dwarves need to keep a defence laid on over here, so they won't be able to commit their full might to trying to stop Ossiriand and the Avari over here. You can see that, perhaps unsurprisingly, this is the kind of tactics I would expect the elves to engage in this kind of fight. They are going to try and skirmish with the enemy first and foremost with their long-range archers, and Scouts of Gellion, several units of them setting up a pretty nasty crossfire to the best of their ability, and any arrows that do get through the line infantry in the front are going to be hitting the very important unit of Lifeward Pikemen of Ered Luin. You've seen how effective pikes can be, and the Lifeward Pikemen, a very important part of the Naugrim defence here as it goes along. Still not a great deal of movement through the central lane though. The sides are where we're seeing a little bit more of a focus. The Grandfather of Deepwood Hearth presumably still doing his thing. With the Brythonbar spears once again gone, the Thralls of Angband reassume their post at the front, and will be trying to do damage to the enemy as they attempt to cross the 3 bridges at the front of Gondolin. Are we going to start to see an assault already? I'd be very surprised. I think the Bow Wards are just here to prevent any sort of counter-attack, and the Thorncasters will be here to pile even more ranged pressure onto this dwarven front line, doubtlessly. There we go, Earthen End Tower also moving forward. I mean, I would actually be fairly eager to use up the ammunition in the Earthen End Tower, because they are also one of the most useful infantry units you're going to have. So if you feel as though you can do the business here in the early game, then you should. Again, you're not seeing the dwarves fall in droves, because obviously from the front these archers are going to be just fine. They have been perhaps baited though into a counter charge, which is going to leave those Lifeward pikemen completely exposed. They're going to take significantly more damage than the Iron Guardsmen would, although yes, the Iron Guardsmen are going to easily be able to dispatch these Bow Wards here. Another unit of Bow Wards that could come in from the flank to try and make this engagement just a little bit better, but the Avari know what they're doing, with the Lifeward pikemen now essentially being exposed as a result of the impetuous charge from the Iron Guardsmen. The Thorncasters are setting about the Lifeward pikemen. Another unit of Iron Guardsmen moving down as well to engage the other unit of Bow Wards, so this is where we should see the Dwarven infantry do their thing. Rangers of the Hidden Path going to try and get into position. The Gloom Hunters of the Trackless Start, they're going to be a little bit better in melee against the dwarves, of course, than the Bow Wards that they're fighting alongside. And a two-handed spear unit just to try and anchor things into position. Considering the shape of this engagement, I mean, it's certainly not the worst looking engagement for the Avari and Ossiriand. The dwarves may be in a little bit of trouble here, especially when you consider that Rangers of the Hidden Path are also here, throwing their javelins at point-blank range into the Iron Guardsmen as they attempt to do their thing. So I actually quite like this engagement so far. They are going to have to deal with those Iron Arbalists, and they are immediately trying to deal with the Rangers of the Hidden Path, because they represent really the biggest threat to this. As much as there is a lot of units on this front line, and the Avari and Ossiriand are pushing fairly well, the dwarves can also commit more units. Some Thorncasters, presumably out of ammunition, now being used as an infantry unit, trying to get in and around the pikemen that they've already tormented. Axe throwers are taking an awful lot of damage here, and this is the problem. Now that the dwarves have committed, any reinforcements they send are going to have to wade through the hailstorm of arrow fire that Ossiriand are going to lay on for them. Meanwhile, over on this side, once again we're seeing the Hunters of Mithrim trying to do their thing, and kind of similar in the way that this engagement is panning out, in the sense that the dwarves initially are going to be dominant in melee. It really just comes down to whether Mithrim can use their supporting units to make the dwarves feel more uncomfortable, but things seem to be progressing better for the Naugrim over here, and that's mainly because they were able to maintain their initial position, and Mithrim more or less came to them. And they have most certainly paid the price for that by the looks of things. Doesn't look like there's much of the hewing guildsmen left, indeed there aren't, and they're the really dangerous melee combatants the dwarves could be facing. The rest of these units are fine, but very basic and not really going to be able to get through those dwarven defences as easily. There's plenty of these units of Dragon Slayers just in behind as well, which should be a fine choice for dealing with the Mithrim units. Iron Guardsmen ready, plenty of reinforcements ready for Farkin. So I think actually from this juncture Mevin should probably take the slower approach, because this initial attack hasn't gone all that well. Maybe just ease off the accelerator a little bit and try and wait, because it does look as though over here you could yet see some good results, although it looks like the Uraloki now in support from Captain Gervais may be enough almost single-handedly to turn the fortunes of these dwarven defenders around. These ranges of the Hidden Path still standing, but only just. They're taking axe thrower fire now as well, who, to be honest with you, these axe throwers have also taken a bit of a beating from the archers just in behind, who have since gone back into hiding. The dwarves starting to reassert their dominance in this fight now that the numbers advantage is not quite so clear cut and the javelin and range support from the elves has faltered a little bit. You're starting to see the dwarven phalanxes reassert themselves on this front line. Halberdiers and pikemen both superior to the spear host of Gellion that they're being asked to deal with. A fair amount of battle boards actually on this. What are they firing at? I see, they're going after the dangerous Earthen End Tower. By Ossiriand standards, fairly well armoured, but not exactly an ideal situation this. They're taking throwing axes, they're taking crossbow bolts, they're taking flaming breath from foul creatures of Angband. And they are going to be committed to melee, but not before taking a real beating. Another unit of Earthen End Tower as well, so I mean, this armour piercing is a concern for the dwarves, but they know exactly what they need to be shooting at to get the most out of their ranged units. Meanwhile, fight happening over here, Ironshod Ravagers, and I mean, I think maybe they weren't too prepared for this level of attack, which is surprising considering you could definitely have seen them coming. Lifeward Hewers, their armour piercing isn't going to be so great against the Gloom Hunters, and that shows actually, because the numbers advantage seems to be enough for the Gloom Hunters to maintain a bit of an advantage here over the Lifeward Hewers in melee. The Scouts of Eglarest maybe waiting for an opportunity to slip past this newly formed front line and sow some chaos in the first layer of defence. Iron Arbalists in place and targeting down the ranges of the Hidden Path. We've already seen the ranges of the Hidden Path used to pretty good effect, and that is going to be the attempt again to whittle down these Iron Halberdiers as they make up the backbone of this defence. The Ironshod Ravagers coming in as well from Angband, because Angband don't have a lot to deal with on their front line at the moment, which is a little bit surprising, maybe a little bit concerning from an attacking perspective. But Angband are able to freely commit reinforcements all around the battlefield, and yeah, Lifeward Hewers are over here, some Thorncasters doing some damage to them. Scouts of Eglarest charging in. They didn't have the most room to charge in, and of course, like I already said in melee, heavy axemen, not the sort of unit that you want your cavalry stuck into a sustained fight with. High Thanes are also in close attendance, so yeah, this attack is going to be turned back by the looks of things, although more units are on the way. It does look as though they are actually going to place more of an emphasis on this little front line over here, which is kind of interesting, but it will also pull a lot more reinforcements off other areas, and attacking from 4 directions at once is one way to pull the defenders around the battlefield a little bit more, and it's not as if the elves are doing poorly over here, although without more reinforcements they will go on to struggle here. Out of ammunition axe throwers just being thrown in to try and give the dwarves a notable numbers advantage here on this front engagement. What's going on over here? Gloom Hunters, still the Lifeward Pikemen holding things down quite nicely. Still not all that much going on over here. I thought it was going to crash for a second then, I was terrified, but as it turns out, no, still not much movement, although we are starting to see maybe the beginnings of an assault, which I think is needed at this point. The other 3 attacks are underway. The Falathrim need to start doing their bit with more than just sending forward individual units of Brythumbar infantry. I mean, he's sending forward 2 this time, which is something, I suppose, but those Troll Guard are still going to be a real worry, I think, and Thralls of Angband going to be able to whittle down these Brythonbar class units on the approach if they can reform themselves quickly enough to get a couple of volleys downrange, which they are dawdling a little bit, but that's more of a Medieval 2 problem than something Captain Gervais is actively doing. Trolls ready. I mean, they are mace men, but still relatively light mace men. We'll see what the future has in store for them. Ooh, what is going on here? Where are the miners then? There they are. That camera shake though, very extreme. They're in a very good position, of course, to do a lot of damage to Mithrim, who are kind of stuck in purgatory a little bit here. Every time they come forward in numbers, they seem to be bouncing off the Naugrim defensive wall, and the Naugrim skirmishers seem to be doing enough to damage them fairly substantially. The tunnel runner's already shaken up. Another unit of tunnel runners over here, plenty of spears, but still, the Iron Guardsman and Iron Halberdier front line from Farkin is holding very strong against Mithrim. Mithrim still has plenty of units they can commit to the fight, so it's not all over for them by any means, but progress is fairly slow, it must be said. Back on this front line, and yeah, once again, I'm really not sure what Hunter's Fox is hoping to accomplish by doing all of this, because those Spearmen of Brythonbar are not going to do much by simply charging like headless chickens into the enemy lines like that. Seafarers of Brythonbar are in melee. I mean, they'll do decently against Iron Shod Ravagers. In fact, it's exactly the kind of unit they will be good against, but the problem is the Iron Shod Ravagers are backed up by those trolls once again, and the Seafarers are almost certainly going to take an awful lot of damage at the hands of the trolls. The trolls starting to get a little bit bloodied after feasting on so many elves from Brythonbar at this point, but yeah, more units required, and there's not really much that's too scary from Angband over here. I mean, the Iron Drakes maybe is what they're worried about, but they're not going to go away. They're going to be there later on in the battle whether you like it or not, so you may as well bite the bullet and try and make something happen now. Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth trying to skirmish in, and actually effectively as well, doing a lot of damage to the Thralls and to the Iron Shod Ravagers with those projectiles. Many will get back up, but many won't. What's going on over here? Was this long-winded assault back here worth it or not? Thorncasters getting engaged, Hunters of Rathloriel presumably out of ammunition. I mean, the Iron Shod Ravagers taking the lead on this defence now. Armour piercing not the most useful thing in the world against Ossiriand and the Avari, but they're damaging enough, and actually against the Thorncasters, the tree class units, armour piercing will be useful, but that's perhaps why the Rathloriel elves are now starting to take precedent on this front line, now the dwarves coming in to support the High Thane. So yeah, the defenders doing just fine for the time being. Over here, the Ents starting to make their way forward, maybe trying to break the back of this defence once and for all. This has been, throughout the battle so far, the avenue of attack the attackers have looked most likely to break through in. Iron Guardsmen, there's Halberdiers. I mean, Halberdiers should be pretty good against Ents, provided they can land a few attacks, and you can see already the Ents are bloody. Do Ents have blood? Are Reloki in a good position to rain down some projectiles? I mean, Scouts of Gellion not the most important unit, but still. Losses being sustained. There's actually some Brythonbar elves over here as well from the Falathrim in support to try and keep this attack going. Ondo Kiando waiting. More Ossiriand units in the background there. Ents continuing to do their thing. I mean, this is a bit of a concern for the dwarves, just the Ents are an intimidating kind of unit at the best of times. Their front line for the time being will be just fine though, with more Halberdiers arriving. They clearly fancy their chances of holding on to this front line for a little bit longer yet. Elsewhere, are we going to see a little bit more from this attack over here? And the Iron Shod Ravagers have been damaged, but certainly not enough to have justified all of this rigmarole from Falathrim. And now, Tormentors of the Iron Crown moving forward. Once again, these Spearmen at Brythonbar seem to have been bullied at every turn. Angband once again filling their boots for kills. These Macemen will be waiting for their opportunity to deal with stuff like the Orankilim, the Avari moving over here. So I do kind of like that the attackers are mixing and matching. It seems like the only ones who are not involved in this sort of sharing of resources are Mithrim, who are fairly exclusively doing their thing on their own over here. And it shows, to be honest with you, because the Naugrim have been at their most comfortable on this front line, I think. There's never really been any great panic over here. That may change with this kind of bombardment from the catapult, with the Naugrim so densely packed. A little bit of friendly fire, but certainly worthwhile, because that was a fairly chunky defence there, and it's already been devastated by effectively a single catapult volley. Sword bearers are going to retreat off the front line, but if they do so completely, then that's going to be enough for the dwarves to also fall back, and then the catapult suddenly won't have that much in the way of good shots anymore. And Farkin is already prepared for this. He's got his units into loose formation, so even any hits that do land are not going to be quite so devastating. And given the rough welcome that he's already given Mithrim, he won't be too worried, although he is going to engage once again. Hunters of Mithrim with their blades drawn. I won't enjoy being in melee with the Naugrim too much, but if I had to guess, this would be bait, and the catapult will probably try to focus down the new concentration of Iron Legion units. At any rate, back over to this side, just in time to see some javelin volleys from the Marines and Spearmen of Brythonbar, perhaps. So, I mean, this is where the Falathrim... the Falathrim were trying to use their javelins on the front line earlier on. The Ents are all dead. The dwarves standing victorious over their corpses, so Alexander 10Q will be very pleased with that, taking some javelin fire for his trouble, but I don't think he'll mind too much in the grand scheme of things. Another counter-attack, but what is there to really stop him over here? There's the Ondo Piando. Actually, the Ents are still there, they just got pulled off the front line, but several of them are dead, so when they go in next time, they'll fall away pretty quickly, I would have thought. Marines of Brythonbar, are there any seafarers? There are. These macemen will be good against the dwarves in close quarters, but these Lifeward pikemen have been really very good on this front line. Considering the damage they took earlier on, when it's come down to just a pure melee fight, when the range support has been taken out of the equation, you can see how well they've done. The Ents are coming back in with the dwarves attacking forward, Marines of Brythonbar being supported by the Ents, and I'm not sure whether these Iron Guardsmen are going to be victorious or not now. The actual damage they're taking from the Ents and then the overwhelming numbers of the Marines leads me to think probably not, so maybe a little bit too big for their boots there, the dwarves. Ondo Hyando firing at something, trying to go after the Uraloki. No, I mean, it's not... I don't know if I would necessarily think this is a great idea. You don't have the best of angles. If you did, then sure. You need to try and deal with those Uraloki at some point, after all. I think numbers-wise, the attacks are probably going to be able to push their way through here as well, but the problem is it's a very narrow defensive position, this. Javelins from the Hunters of Rathloril and behind the Randirim are in there. Part of the problem they also have over here, the attackers, is the Iron Halberdiers are in a narrow gap for a phalanx unit, and they're also being backed up by the High Thanes, the strongest unit of infantry the Naugrim can field. So it's going about as well as you would expect so far. I think there were Mythern and Tolgalen over here at some point, weren't there? There are still there, but 16 of them not able to lay down their armor-piercing damage in the way they perhaps would have liked, and so far things are still going pretty well for the defenders, and they're still holding on to their outer defences. Meanwhile, these Trollguard have presumably gotten a ton of kills. The Falathrim have been very accommodating to them, to be fair, but you can only defeat what's put in front of you, and Captain Gervais has certainly done that so far. This maybe is a little bit more like it. The catapult has been trying to do some damage, and I mean, there are a fair few Angband casualties over here. So the Falathrim have been turning up the heat a little bit, but I don't think Angband will be too disappointed with how this has gone so far. I think they'll be pretty happy. More Seafarers of Brythonbar moving forward. They need more support than this, though. Singular infantry units at any one time. I mean, I know that bridges are a pain, but I feel like that's not enough of an excuse given how this fight has gone so far. Uraloki trying to do their thing against the Marines of Brythonbar, so they're going to rush through here now, all of these Brythonbar units, to surround the units over here and give those units in the rear entrance of Gondolin the entryway they need. In come the Lancers of Aderant, trying to charge into the Uraloki and skewer them. This is where this cavalry could really come into play. Cavalry, for defenders or attackers, is always a calculated risk in a siege battle, but this is where they really can pay for themselves, the Ossiriand riders. Forward come Thorncasters, getting into melee. One of the Uroloki does fall, actually, which is a sign they don't have too much life left in them. There are still some Dwarven units left behind, but they weren't able to cover the whole entrance, and that's why those Falathrim units simply went through the Phalanx units that still remain, because still the Pikemen and Halberdiers are proving to be a real thorn in the side of the Elves. Uroloki's still there, one Ent, fighting alongside its more diminutive kin. A real clash of the Titans here, being kicked in the midriff. Not dying though, which is fairly impressive. Anyway, what are we seeing here? Marines of Brythombar are now able to surround this position. Combination of Iron Halberdiers, and I think the Iron Arbalists are still fighting from the front, but I don't think the units that are actually attacking from the front are sufficient anymore to actually win this fight for them. I think there's nothing that can really break through all of these Iron Legion units and the High Thanes that are in the middle of them. So as much as this is a fine idea in Tundra's Vox to try and support this assault, I think it came a little bit too late. Yeah. Mithrim, still with really no progress to show for all the blood that has been spilled over on this side of the settlement. Again, they do have the advantage in terms of a single army here, do the Elves, so as much as their progress has been fairly limited throughout the battlefield so far, they do have more manpower to burn, relatively speaking, than the defenders do. But the defenders will be pretty pleased, I think, with how this has gone so far. They've been able to take most of their engagements relatively efficiently, and they've been able to mitigate the damage on those few that they haven't. Iron Arbalest moving forward, being swamped by these sword bearers. Perhaps a rare dominant melee performance here from Mithrim in this fight. What about the Falathrim from the front? Are we seeing a little bit more from them? This is a much more well-rounded assault now. The Avari's host of the Withered Ash coming forward as well. Catapult crew and Seafarers of Brythombar fighting side by side, but again, they need to be more all-in than they've currently been, I think, the Falathrim. They've got their units across now. Nobles of Balar, this is a little bit more like it. This is a worry for Angband now, of course, because this is a fairly substantial force which has crossed. Nobles of Balar coming in from the side to help deal with the Ironshod Halberdiers and the Tormentors of the Iron Crown, who, if they can get into close quarters with the Nobles, will be dangerous with those wicked-looking maces they have. Thralls of Angband are there. Ironshod Arbalists doing their best to support this front line, such as it is now. But if part of it is manned exclusively by Thralls, you know that you're really just clinging on more so than having any sort of hope of winning. I mean, Aran Keerlin are going to butcher their way through Thralls of Angband incredibly quickly. And of course, as I've mentioned a few times already, the Falathrim, the only ones really with a heavy armour core unit that they can, a series of core units that they can commit forwards, able to go toe to toe with the likes of Angband a little bit more so. Some bow wards moving forward, so like we've already seen from the host of the Withered Ash, the Avari, certainly having an element to their own army on this front line as well, supporting this Falathrim push, and this is a little bit more like it from the attackers. Angband will be overrun at this point. Having a look over here, the Naugrim have also been dealt with over here. They did pretty well over here, the Naugrim, considering some of the shortcomings of this assault. The Lifewood Pikemen will be overrun by this unit of Hunters. The rest of the units that are now over here presumably going to be enough. I mean, the Randirim are actually now able to shoot unimpeded as a result of the demise of all the other units over here, but these units are now cut off from retreating to the second layer. It is also worth saying that I don't know actually how much of a second layer the defenders are actually going to be able to lay on, because they front-loaded their defence a lot, which of course does mean that once it falters, you need to hope that the attackers are on the verge of defeat, which that's not necessarily the case with how much the Falathrim still have left in store for them. We've got Pikes still, which you've already seen the benefits of having them. Another unit of High Thanes, Hewers, Bulldogs, that's another unit which is pretty scary. Some more Angband defenders I would imagine are over here, including Spearguard and Tormentors, so they've got a fairly decent array of units. It's not fully comprehensive though, and you can actually see they're trying to save a few more units are Angband, but I don't know if these Iron Shot Ravagers are going to be able to get away with the Falathrim mercifully, or mercilessly I should say, certainly not mercifully, mercilessly chasing them down. A little bit further behind, yeah, that front line was overrun pretty quickly, so perhaps this patience from the Falathrim will pay off. I'm still not convinced that throwing those Thombar units under the bus so readily earlier on was necessarily the right thing to do. But patience as a whole, I think, was always going to be the way that the elves could be effective in this fight, given the compositions of their relative army, of all their armies. And that could prove to be the case here. The Falathrim will have to be in the driving seat here, because I don't think anyone else, other than maybe the Avari with the units that are marching in tandem with them, have got enough to really contribute hugely. I think Ossiriand and Mithrim are going to be pretty damn depleted when all is said and done. Mithrim's still trying to make inroads over on this side of the settlement, but yet more Iron Legion units moving forward to try and block the advance of some of these hewing guildsmen. Sword bearers having defeated some out of ammunition crossbows coming up against a genuine line infantry unit, and they certainly don't have the manpower left to them to be victorious in this particular fight. As the rain continues to fall, outlaws also with their two-handed spears. What do Mithrim actually have left? Some more sentries, some more tunnel runners. The catapult, if it still has a bit of ammunition, could be useful in the late game as well, but positioning is going to be somewhat tricky. The Syrian general does fall. High Thanes over there. The Iron Halberdiers still very much doing their thing. Over here, Randirim. I don't know how much ammunition they have left. Perhaps they literally just ran out, although they are having to deal with this one annoyance in melee. Yeah, they redraw their bows. But they've been using their ammunition for a little while at this point, so I can't imagine that their ammunition supply is that bountiful. I think trying to go after these halberdiers somewhat successfully as well. These High Thanes doing very well for themselves. They've been in a bit of a slog. But then this is exactly where you'd expect elite dwarven infantry to thrive, so perhaps it's not too surprising. Pretty decent charge that from the scouts of Eglarest, indeed cutting the unit that remains down by nearly half. Don't necessarily want to be in melee with them for an extended period of time, do the Falathrim riders. With each swing more riders fall, but definitely a worthwhile trade if they can get rid of these High Thanes. And the Randirim continuing to shoot into the Iron Halberdiers to try and deal with them. Where are the High Thanes going? Lancers of Aderant moving in. Interestingly enough, the body-piercing projectiles hitting them somewhat as well. The High Thanes kind of caught between the scouts of Eglarest and the Randirim. They can't really engage the Randirim straight up, because if they do, they'll simply be charged by the scouts. I think this is going to be that for them. Are we seeing an attack already over here? Kind of, actually. Not really waiting for Mithrim or the remnants of Ossiriand to move in. They are instead trying to get their business done very quickly. Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth making a real nuisance of himself in here. I don't know how long he's going to last doing this. Scourges of Gothmog in here should be pretty good against some light units, but considering this is where all of the Noldor of the Falathrim are hidden. And there goes the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth. There goes the Dwarven General finally falling over on that side of the field, so finally dealing with the Grandfather, though, removes an element of chaos from this front line. Combination of the Iron Crown units backed up by the Halberdiers. Beginning this assault with the Avari moving in first and foremost, which is actually where the Scourges of Gothmog could be pretty useful, maybe charging into the rear of the host, and the Bow Wards wouldn't be the worst thing. I mean, sending the Bow Wards in to fight the Scourges isn't going to go too well for them, but it'll at least stop them from getting any sort of rear charge. Falathrim need to follow through now as well, and that's what they're doing. Sending forward some Eglarest and Brithombar class units. What have we over here? Relatively simple dwarven front line being laid on, but more Rangers of the Hidden Path are going to make life significantly more uncomfortable than it would otherwise be here for these dwarven defenders. And once again, Alexander Tenku is being forced into a downhill counter-attack. On this occasion it is more pressing that he charges downhill rather than the opening moments of the melee fights in this siege. because he really can't afford to allow his pikemen to be cut down by these rangers of the Hidden Path. Lance of Aderant moving forward, Hunts of Rathloriel, probably among the last units on display that Ossiriand have to offer, really. We still have the Ondokando. Do they have their bow still drawn as well? No, they don't. They have their twin axes, which is not too surprising. Armor-piercing archers don't tend to have that much ammunition. Randiran, specialty projectiles that don't have that much in the way of ammunition aren't really too useful from Ossiriand, but they'll be fine for the moment. What are Mithrim up to? Are they finally making headway? It doesn't really look like it. I mean, kind of. Hewing guildsmen able to get in and amongst things. They'll be the more efficient combatant when they're facing directly off against the Lifeward hewers, I think, but I still don't think that's going to be enough to see them to overall victory here.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
And Mithrim trying to do their best as well to get that javelin support laid down. Tunnel runners getting in behind enemy lines as well. I mean, if Farkin is going to retreat, it probably should be now. Or should it? I don't even know if he should retreat, to be honest with you. It might just be a better idea to try and outright crush Mithrim here on the outer defences, because I don't think anyone's coming to Mithrim's aid. All the other elven factions were sharing resources between themselves, but Mervin's been left to fend for himself over here. And that will continue to be the case, because if this frontal assault is going to be effective, it needs everything, although perhaps some shades of the guarded path are going to make their way around. What is going on here? There's, I think that will be the result of the Iron Drakes, would it not? Indeed it is. They are very depleted. It looks devastating, but much in the same way as the Uraloki Fire Breath, that's only really going to be the case against lightly armoured units, and considering they're firing directly at Arine, Ephedune and Nobles of Baelor, still though, in conjunction with the very thick front line that Angband still have, I don't know, necessarily, if the Falathrim are going to be able to make this stick, and they need to make this stick, because this is where the majority of the attacking strength still lies. The Nobles of Baelor coming in, that will be enough to defeat these Scourges of Gothmog. Some Marines of Eglares pushing further back and able to engage with some Iron Shod Arbalists, so there are definitely some weaker elements to this Angband defence, but time will only tell if that's going to be enough for the elves to actually push through and claim victory here. I don't know if Angband necessarily have a huge amount left to them, other than there's bulldogs around here somewhere, right? There they are. They're retreating though, which I find to be somewhat counterintuitive. I think they need to get in there and be the centre of that defence. I think with the bulldogs, Angband will probably win that fight on the front line. I don't think the Falathrim will have the answer to that now, with the support those Iron Drakes are laying down. Dwarven defence getting back into position. Ossiriand really proving themselves to be more of an annoyance than anything else at this point, but a valuable annoyance. Captain Gervais, I really hope that this doesn't prove to be a key error. I would have the Bulldogs fighting on the front line at this point. There's no point in even retreating them to the back here, because there's nothing really for them to... There's Iron Shod Arbalists, I guess, but that's not really a last stand. Like, if the elves have got any sort of army left to you, 2 units is not going to be enough to turn your fortunes around. Hunters of Mithrim are behind enemy lines, so it does look as though Mithrim are actually going to break through at this point, and maybe this is the thinking, I guess. They're seeing the danger spring up that the dwarves could ultimately be overcome finally, with at long last some reinforcements are on the way. The shades of the guarded path are here. High Thanes from Farkin have been committed. I mean, he has committed more reinforcements down here. They were waiting in the second layer previously, so he has committed to trying to kill off Mithrim completely. And I don't know, Catapult being engaged, Outlaws. Mithrim have pretty much committed everything at this point, so even if they are victorious, everything they have will be battle damage to some extent, but the elves, you just get the sense that the tide is shifting a little bit in the elves' favour at this point. Just get that vibe. Aran Keolim are over here, they're going to be able to get in and amongst the pikes as well. The miners trying to soften the blow of the Naugrim charge. Cavalry's over here as well from the Falathrim, Scouts of Eglares, which is going to make keeping these front lines organised just that little bit more awkward. Shades of the Guarded Path may not be armour piercing, but their base damage is still going to be enough to give the dwarves something to think about here. they're going to charge in. Well, there goes the Avari general. Didn't last too long in melee with the dwarves there, but the rest of his unit will continue the fight where he left off, I'm sure. The High Thanes will, of course, continue to butcher their way through the rank and file of these Mithrim units. That's not anything to be too shocked about. Ossiriand actually moving forward, so I mean, I guess this is going to be the last stand. 2 units is going to be the last stand. It's foresight, I guess, but I feel as though they maybe should have just committed over here and tried to maybe form up a bit of a Helm's Deep over here. The Iron Drakes continuing to try and lay down some fire support, and they're doing so. But you can see how resilient the Avari have to do now. This is exactly where they're going to earn their pay. That. You can see that many of them are getting staggered, but relatively few of them are getting boiled in their armour. Angband's front lines here on the hunt are still holding, but they need to continue to engage with the Falathrim, and Lances of Aderant making a nuisance of themselves, trying to be dealt with now by the Iron Drakes. And you have to say, the cavalry from the attackers has proven to be a very worthwhile investment here. The Iron Drakes getting hit by javelins now. Marines of Eglarest using up the last of their ammunition at this point, so a very, very depleted unit of Iron Drakes. As the elves continue to push forwards. A charge from the Lances of Aderant, trying to deal with the Iron Shot Arbalists, who of course crossbows like this are always going to be a bit of a concern. Falathrim continue their forward march. Mithrim finally with some help from their peers going to be able to put an end to this dwarven last stand being laid on by Farkin. Rangers of the Hidden Path have also been a particularly impressive unit in this fight. Still have any of those Dragon Slayers left? Relatively few of them. Of course, the catapult crew for Mithrim is made up of hewing guildsmen, so they're very capable of looking after themselves in a melee fight. Elsewhere, there's still some High Thanes, but only 9 of them remain at this point. With their very large axes, kind of a two-handed axe that they're wielding one-handed, but they are the best of the best that the Naugrim have to offer, so I'll allow it. Rapidly approaching the final 10,000 frames, which usually denotes the final phases of the battle, which is kind of true, but with the last stand comprised of only 2 units, I'm not sure you can really call it a last phase as such. I think it's fairly clear to see at this point the attackers will probably be going on to win this battle, the elves reclaiming their lovely city. The orcs continuing to fight the good fight on this front line. Speaking of the Iron Crown still holding things down, which is my surprise, honestly, that Angband didn't front load and try and win this fight more quickly. With the Bulldogs involved, the Orion would probably have fallen away. They still have some Life Ward pikemen over here as well. I mean, it's not the best place for a final stand if you're surrounded, but it's better than what they're ultimately going to experience, I think. Iron Shot Arbalists actually beating the Marines of Eglarest in melee, which is kind of interesting. More cavalry charges forthcoming. Iron Guardsmen. Kind of a clumsy charge from the Scouts of Eglarest, but they've been relatively effective throughout the battle so far, so you can't complain too much. There's not too many Falathrim units remaining now. Spear Guard of the Iron Crown. I mean, it is worth saying that the Bulldogs are so strong that if the Elves don't manage to dismantle this Angband resistance fairly quickly, the Bulldogs could be a bit of a concern, but with stuff like two-handed spears, Nobles of Balar, I don't know. Nobles of Balar getting grilled a little bit by the Iron Drakes, who have been slowly but surely racking up a pretty impressive kill count for themselves, but that will most certainly end now. I would assume the Scouts of Avari will be left in melee until the few Iron Drakes left are killed, even though they do wield that halberd. It's not the sort of thing that they can be too concerned about. They just need to make sure that those units are dealt with now. What remains of Mithrim moving forward. Ossiriand also forming up with them. The catapult crew is moving forward still, so I have to assume they still have ammunition, which is maybe another nail in the coffin of any hopes the defenders had of their Bulldogs being able to carry them over the line. Over yonder we have Iron Guardsmen of Balagost. Victory seems certain for the defenders. I mean, I don't know. You can see that, you know, backs to the wall style from the Lifewood Pikemen. Do they have any... Well, they have the catapult, I suppose, but this is the sort of thing which can be a real problem, so I don't really think they have anything that the Lifewood Pikemen can't defeat from the front now. Nobles of Balar, of course, won't be able to match their range, and they won't be able to match their unit count at this point either. Only 33 of them remain after their exertions, so maybe... Like I said, if they do go on to lose this fight, the defenders, it will be because the Bulldogs did not contribute over here. If they had the Bulldogs, they would be really, really cleaning house over here at this point. But this could still work out because the Bulldogs, of course, is still yet another foe they have to deal with after dismantling their foes over here. Spearguard of the Iron Crown, fighting to the last man, but they will, of course, be dealt with by the Falathrim bodyguards, and then there's also scouts of Eglaras making nuisances of themselves, as they have done throughout. Shades of the Guarded Path on the way, 67 of them. Still Lancers of Aderant. Lancers? Definitely don't want to be going down the path of having an accent like that. Nowhere near posh enough for that. Shades of the Guarded Path. I mean, 67 of them, they are effectively the bodyguard infantry option the Avari have. They may only be single HP, but damaging nonetheless. It's going to be the end of Alexander 10Q's army, I think. Farkin's still fighting away with his Naugrim forces. Of course, Angband will probably be the last defenders left standing. It's going to be a close one, this. The momentum has shifted back and forth a little bit. I still think the attackers shouldn't have too much for the defenders. When we look at this final stand, I mean, on the approach, the Iron Shot Arbalists are going to be able to do a lot of damage, and the Bulldogs are here. But the problem is, the Bulldogs on their own, they could just be run through. There's not a lot of them, so mass may prove to be an issue here. So I can see what they're trying to do, but I don't know. Can they deal with the Lifewood Pikemen in an efficient fashion? I mean, they are starting to fall away, the Lifewood Pikemen. This could prove yet to be still fairly costly as we go up to ×2 speed. There's only so much I can say about a pike fight after all. You can see that the pikes are actually doing relatively well against the relatively lightly armoured Avari infantry units, and the pikes here are really doing the business. This is why pikes can be so effective. And if they can cut down on the elven manpower enough for the Bulldogs and that one unit of Arbalists to see them over the line, that will really be probably the best advertisement for utilising pikemen that I could ever possibly give. Trying to push him from the side. I mean, yeah, mass is how you're going to have to try and do this. The Orion Atherton getting in and amongst them. As soon as you do buckle their formation, even high-tier pikes have a tendency to have relatively low stats after all. Defeat seems certain. I mean, they're making a bit of a meal of this. I don't know if they even have much left. I mean, they're going to try and make do with what they have over there. They still have a catapult, I think. Yeah, they're going to try and maybe bombard the area. Iron Charbalist getting out of the way of the catapult. The catapult crew as a melee force might be very important here as well, with the hewing guildsmen and the damage they can deal. And still the Lifewood Pikemen getting as many kills as they possibly can before they fall. It's going to be interesting, this, isn't it? The finest of margins as we enter the decisive phase, and yeah, I guess I was being unfair. This is a genuine phase of the battle, the final phase. Are we seeing anything in the way of, I mean, yeah, the Iron Shot Arbalist getting into place. Reloading. They do need to be careful about what they go after, though. They definitely need to go after the right kind of foes. Stuff like Ondo Kiando in melee can easily be dealt with by a unit like the Bulldogs. Catapult crew are going to try and get into melee. The Iran Lim that remain. I mean, yeah, this is going to be the end of this little clutch of units over here, but any elf they kill is going to be one that Angband don't have to try and deal with later on. Will their sacrifice prove to be the decisive one? Hewing Guildsmen, 36 of them, GONDOLIN, 16. Fine margins. There's still a fair few Avari and Aderant, again, considering the kind of fights they've been involved in. It really is a testament to how resilient they are as well. They're not, in terms of bodyguard units, they're not the best at giving damage, but at receiving damage, they're one of the very best there is. And that's going to be the end of that. Oh. Looks like I'm missing something over here as well, so we will go back down to 1 speed. I didn't realise they were moving forward quite this quickly. I'm not sure about this, honestly, from Ossiriand. I mean, there's a few crossbow bolts raining down, and Bulldogs are going to easily be able to deal with the Untitled, as I kind of expected. Maybe as this is a ruse to try and get those Iron Shot Arbalists to use up their ammunition. Rangers of the Hidden Path. Yeah, these Untitled are doomed. Will the Bulldogs have the strength to win this battle for them? That's going to be the end over here. The dwarves... Well, I say that, there is actually still something going on. There's still 2 Lifeward Pikemen over here, and only 1 Mithrim Spearman that has been tasked with killing both. So I don't know about that. We'll see. Yeah, they notice there is some left, so I'm going to dispatch a dozen and a bit more Marines of Aderant to deal with them once and for all, which should be enough. I mean, there's only 2 pikes at this stage. Let's go up to ×2 speed again. So overwhelming force should be enough here. Like I said, it's only 2 units. But if they linger too long in the sights of those orcish crossbows, who knows? The damage could start to pile up. The Bulldogs could start to become that scary force in melee. The catapult is moving forwards. Surely this is Farkin's last combatant, getting punched continuously by that elf. Spearmen damage, not even once. Spear Malice is so bad he's resorted to using his fists. So let's see. This is going to be where things are decided ultimately. Are they going to get into melee? They are, I believe. What are they going after? I don't know why they're going after the Scouts of Aderant. I mean, I should probably be going after the catapult crew. They're trying to push their way through here. I mean, this is the problem. The Bulldogs have to guard the whole approach, and that means they're going to have to spread themselves relatively thin, which means they can get in behind enemy lines, and Rangers of the Hidden Path will immediately silence the Arbalists, and without the Arbalist support, I really don't see any chance that Angband are going to be able to turn this around. They've made it a closer game than it looked like being after the breakthrough of the Falathrim over the frontal bridges, but yeah. I do believe the Elves will ultimately have their victory, unless the Bulldogs are significantly more powerful than I think they are already. Comes to Laurel getting in there, yeah, the attackers know they want to deal with the Arbalists first, isolate the Bulldogs and then surround and try and destroy them. Arbalists for now, victory seems certain. Avari and Aderant, of course, are another bodyguard tier unit that still live on the field. They're not going to do too well in a straight battle against something like the Bulldogs, but they do at least represent that really high level of quality that it means Angband don't have a monopoly on such things here, which would have been one of their hopes. Is that 1 pikeman still alive? Yes, he is. He is still stuck in the corner, going nowhere fast. Player admits defeat. Was that him? Yes. Well, fair enough. He wasn't really going to be able to achieve anything anyway. Catapult is being used, which is somewhat risky, but I mean, they've killed off an awful lot of Bulldogs at this point, so worthwhile. Bulldogs are exposed, so yeah, the Elves going to be victorious. Why take chances? Damn the casualties, fire away. Back up to ×2 speed, I think. Gondolin will be retaken. Scouts of Eglarest, what remains of them anyway, cycle charging in. Again, one of the standout performers, alongside stuff like Rangers of the Hidden Path. For the defenders, the Lifeward Pikemen, of course. The General Iron Legion units acquitted themselves very well as well. Mithrim General falls, killed by a Bulldog. Mithrim themselves had a bit of a hard time in this battle, but they definitely contributed quite a lot to their team's ultimate victory here. Although, yeah, it's going to be very close, isn't it? As in, well, there goes the enemy general, but I was just thinking in terms of numbers that will be remaining by the time this battle is over. Could it be? Could it be true? There's 18 Bulldogs left, 25 Orion Ephidu. Has all that friendly fire actually been detrimental? I mean, these Hewing Guildsmen should be enough to make sure that these Ironshot Arbalists get absolutely butchered. Up close and personal. Even here, yeah, they rout, and with that, Aran Lim and Hewing Guildsmen should be enough to support the Orion Ephidoon to kill off what remains of the Bulldogs. But even here, there was always a little bit of doubt, perhaps. And the defenders have certainly given a good showing of themselves. The attackers, with not as many heavy units as maybe they could have had, given the compositions of their army, ended up being able to take a fair few blows in the end. And that's not many. I mean, there's going to be, what, less than 100 elves left alive at the end as Gondolin falls back into their hands. A lot of bodies to clear out of the settlement as well. That would be an unenviable task. Victory seems certain for the Bulldogs. They're being a little bit optimistic, I think. There's only 7 of them remaining, and a few more elves are still on the way to help out things here. And yes, now it's flicked around. And there you have it. The elves win. Pretty much all that the elves have left is in camera shot as well, so a bit of a classic, this one, in the end. Once again, the Naugrim end up losing, so all 3 of their debut battles, we've showcased them being on the losing side, which is somewhat reminiscent of when we showcased the Avari when they first released, I seem to remember, but it's not as if they've been bad in any of these battles, it's just overall.
We that were slain and defeated on the field, but fate has been kind and delivered us victory.
They weren't able to see themselves over the line, but no one really played badly on this occasion, I don't think. In the end, the caution shown by the Falathrim and the Avari through the middle was the right way to go about things. Like I said, I'm still not sure it was necessary to throw those Brythombar units under the bus, but in the end you can't argue with the results. Both Ossiriand and Mithrim ended up taking a fair whack of damage early on, but in the end that proved to be not too much of a concern for them. They were still able to contribute right up until the late game. Mithrim actually getting a fair amount of kills against Farkin's army, so as much as he was taking a lot of damage, Mevin was giving it in response as well. As for the defenders, like I said, really it just comes down to little bits and pieces. I still think if the Bulldogs had been committed towards that fight earlier on, they probably would have ended up winning this battle, honestly, the defenders, because they would have been able to clean up those units, they would have been more consolidated, and I don't think they gained a great deal from having these 2 units as a final stand. Yes, the margin of victory for the attackers was very, very fine, but I don't know. I still think he would have been better off committing those units there. I mean, we'll never know now. It could have been worse for them, but who knows. Fine margins, as they say. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that. You know, it's one of those sieges where, because the margins of victory were so close, even the smallest thing, like choosing when to use a volley of crossbow ammunition, for example, could have changed the outcome of the fight. So there's no point in getting too wound up in how things could have been different. Let's see what did the damage for Ossiriand on the perspective of Lord of Belagost. Ents doing very well for themselves, you know, committing themselves into a pretty dense dwarven front line. The Ents ended up dying off pretty quickly, but they were going up against some really good quality dwarven units. One of the units of Mithrim and Tolgalan getting 0 kills, which is obviously very poor. The one behind them, though, getting 135, which is pretty decent. I mean, they're the kind of unit which is going to be good against both Angband and the Naugrim. The rest of the units not managing to break 100, other than the Lancers of Aderant, like we said. The cavalry in general, Scouts of Eglarest, and the Lancers here, proving themselves to be worthwhile additions to the attackers. The rest of the army, that was always going to be difficult on the attack, especially as a more lightweight faction like this. It's always going to be a bit more tricky to lay down the kills. Obviously Ossiriand can rack up incredible kill counts on the defence because of their specialty skirmishers, but it's a bit more difficult for them on the attack because they have to walk into someone else's spiderweb rather than maintaining their own. But there we go. Big thank you to Lord of Belagos for sending this one. Actually, no, he just pointed this one out to me, but it's effectively sending this one in, seeing as this one was from his perspective, but also pointing out the other two replays that we've seen the Naugrim be a part of as well. A good debut for them, obviously a nice little clutch of Silmarillion replays that we've been able to see over the past 2.5 weeks or so, and hopefully that will continue here and there as we move forwards as well, alongside the Reforged replays, alongside the bracket, not replays, but the bracket videos I've been doing. Still intend to do that channel update live stream follow-up at some point in the future, probably fairly near future after this one, unless I'm being sent away for work again for what will hopefully be the last time. We shall see on that one. But yes, it's the sort of thing that hopefully we'll be doing fairly soon. Yeah, other than that, not really too much else to say. Normal service will continue outside of the details that I have just given. So yeah, big thank you to all the players and to Lord of Belagos once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.